All right, hello everybody. I'm here with the one and only Professor Alfonso Fasano. Hello, Dr. Fasano.
Hi, everyone.
It looks
Hi, Ben.
like I think for most of us that have gotten used to the Zoom life, we would suspect that you're in that background behind you is virtual, but it's not. Could you show us a
It's
little
not.
bit
It's not.
about where you are and tell us a little bit about where you are as well right now?
Yeah, I'm basically my parents' hometown in Italy, in the south of Italy. It's 1,000 meters above the sea level. It's a medieval town, and this is where I come very often to relax, work a little bit, and see my friends. Right this moment, I'm using the best Wi-Fi in the town. It's basically a winery, so you might see a couple of glasses of wine coming by at some point. Don't worry, it's not for me.
Okay. And could you actually just move the camera a little bit just so we can see that it is real? All right, awesome. Yeah.
You want me to show around?
If you can, yeah, that'd be even better. Wow.
All right, so this is where I'm staying right now, and yeah, it's just an old town, as you can imagine. It's a medieval town. It's called Nusco.
Wow. Well, it looks beautiful. Now, there's
Thank
a
you.
lot of things that we've talked about over the years, and there's a lot of things that I think that you do that's very interesting. One of the things that I think you do that, in my opinion, is actually might be the most interesting thing of all the interesting things that you do is are you the director or the co-director of the MAID program for the Western at Toronto? Or what is your
No, no,
title
I'm not the
in that
co.
regard?
Yeah, no, I'm the in terms of directing, I'm the co-director of the surgical program.
Okay.
MAID is, as you know, medical assistance in dying, and all big hospitals have a team dedicated to it, and I'm just part of the team. For the longest time, I was the only neurologist part of it, because most of the other assessors and people performing the intervention are either ICU staff or psychiatrists or mainly oncologists. So for years, I was the only neurologist. I guess now there is one more for sure, perhaps another one coming. So I'm just part of the team.
Okay. Well, one way I thought about doing this is so up until recently, I thought for a little while that I might only have 10 or 15 more healthy years left. But then I recently had this DBS procedure, and it seems to have gone very well. So I think it's given me maybe 2 or 3, 4 more decades that I can think about with my life. However,
Mhm.
I still think I will reach a point at some point along the way where I'll want to decide for myself when and where I want to leave this world, for lack of a better term. Um,
Yeah.
so let's say me and you are still here, and it's 1957 or whatever, and I come to you and I say, my symptoms have gotten to the point where I can't control them anymore. We've run out of options. There's nothing we can do anymore. I'd like to start this program. What happens next? What are the next steps involved?
Yeah. So first off, I should say that whatever I say now, it can change over time, because as you clearly recognize, this is a difficult topic, and even from a legal standpoint, the rules and all the norms related to it are changing on a almost daily basis. The MAID program we deal with right now is very different than the MAID program I started working in like 3 years ago, just to give you an idea. And there's also difference depending on where in Canada you are, because it may change province by province what's done. But anyways, generally speaking, when someone wants to go for MAID, there are at this moment at least two basic steps. The first one is to have the assessment, and the assessment is done by two independent assessors. So two physicians with different expertise assess the patient, and I can tell you what they look for in particular. And it's not just a matter of being doctors here; it's also a matter of applying the law, making sure that the patient really fulfills all the criteria that have been established by the Parliament. And then the second step is the actual intervention, as we call it, which is basically an injection. So for this reason, there are basically two, at least at UHN in my institution where we do this, there are two different teams. One team is the team of the assessors, and the other team is the team of the people that do the intervention. Um, yeah.
Okay, it sounds kind of like DBS in that sense, in that there's the surgical team and then there's the programming team, and then they talk and they
Yeah.
meet, but anyways, now
Modern medicine, right? It's
yeah.
always a teamwork, everything we do.
Okay. Now, before we go into the details, I'd like to talk, if we can, a little bit about the history of these programs, because in the past, so a lot in the chronic neurological community, there's something that's colloquially known as taking a trip to Switzerland. And what that means is that you go to Switzerland. I think there's a company there called, well, we don't need to name any names, I guess, but there's a company there. You pay them, I think, 20,000 euros or 20,000 Swiss francs, and that's the last trip essentially that you ever take. In your experience, I guess, could you walk us through how this program was developed, and in your experience, how it's impacted the lives of patients as it's developed over time as well?
Yeah. Obviously, this program is very different from the Swiss one. I won't talk in details about the one in Switzerland, also because I'm not really aware of what they do, how they do. But obviously, I spoke with some patients that were looking into it. I also met some patients that were donating to this program in Switzerland. Because clearly this is a need that everyone has, out there. You don't have to be actually suffering from a chronic condition. Any person at some point in their life might want to consider MAID. So talking about Canadian MAID, I think this goes very well with the tradition of Canada as a very progressive country. And I think this is actually a step in the right direction. It's something that's interested me from day one for a number of reasons. I would say the most important one is that I'm Italian. I grew up in a Catholic environment. I was trained in Catholic schools, Catholic university, and I've seen patients with ALS. I've seen a lot of patients. And don't get me wrong, every doctor does their best, they do their best to improve patients' life and ease the suffering. There's obviously a huge palliative program everywhere, in big centers at least, including Italy. But when it comes to putting an end to someone's life, deciding to put an end to your own life, I think, regardless of philosophical, ethical, or religious belief, this is every individual's right. It's a little bit of, again, the influence of Catholic Church and also the public opinion that in many countries this is not place, but it's basically the future. Everywhere at some point there will be something similar to MAID, because at some point it's the only solution that people have.
Yeah, I guess on that point, would you be able to elaborate a little bit more and say why it's so important? I mean, because I've seen a few of these cases myself. I'm sure you've seen way more than I ever could, though. What are those last kind of years like for a lot of these patients? Why is this so important that we actually have something like this in place?
Well, it's difficult to generalize, of course, because every condition has a different course, and also every person, even with the same condition, has a different end. But I see this more as an opportunity, as a right that everyone should have. Doesn't mean that you need to go for it. Doesn't mean that you need to know what it is. But I think, in principle, it's something that should be there. That if someone can't take the pain anymore, palliative interventions are not helping anymore, this person might want to decide consciously to end it. And the problem is that this is already happening everywhere in the world. I can tell you that there are many doctors that, even in countries where this is not legal, they push a little bit more of benzodiazepine, perhaps, so that the patient is a little more relaxed, let's say, And if you do that in someone on morphine at the same time with a respiratory problem, like in ALS patients, why you do that. So that actually you are accelerating the end of life. So I don't like things to be done this way. It's better to have rules and to do it properly. And this is why MAID is important. MAID is basically making legal something that is needed, something that everyone should be offered to if needed, or at least we need to know that there's this option. Which doesn't mean denying palliative medicine. Palliative medicine is actually way more important than MAID, if you think about it. But at some point, unfortunately, there is no way out, and so that should be an option for people that want to go for that option. And again, everybody, that's at the end of the day down up to the individual, to families' belief, to religious view. But at least you have an option that you can consider. I think that's the most important part of this.
Okay. Now, a lot of people, when they start thinking about these problems, one of the first things they think about is, one, when do I start talking to my doctor about this? And then two,
Mm-hmm.
how do you know if somebody's actually of sound mind to make these decisions? Because with these conditions, you can have a lot of cognitive deficits. How do you know somebody is able to make them?
Yeah. No, that's actually two very important questions. So as for the first one, I think that this is a conversation that should start early in the patient-doctor relationship. Because if you start this conversation at some point, it might be interpreted by the patient or the family of the patient as something like, there's nothing else we can do for you, so why don't you consider MAID at this point? And that's not the case. In a way, it's similar to brain donation. Brain donation is another, in neurology, is another important step for research. Patients can do, after obviously they pass, they can donate their brain. But when is the right time to talk about brain donation? Obviously not at the end, because at the end you need to talk about other things. So brain donation, what to do with the rest of your life, what to do when you're not capable anymore, it's something that should be discussed early. The problem is that doctors are not trained. Doctors are not trained to be human sometimes. They are mainly technicians, and often they are uncomfortable in discussing these things. So I think medicine and the university should be focusing more on how to train the future generation of doctors on how to approach sensitive and difficult topics like this one. So, answer to your first question, do it soon, just to have a discussion, just that you know that that's an option. And doesn't mean that it's something you need to act on, and do it with a doctor you are comfortable with. So perhaps the GP should be the first one, because the GP will know the patient better. But it can be anybody that knows the patient well, that has an established relationship. Obviously, I will never talk about MAID the first time I see someone, and I don't even know how they will approach their own course of the disease. As for your second question, instead, I think we need to make a clear distinction about three different aspects. First, most people going for MAID these days, and there are many, are oncological patients. So in oncology, since oncology, as you know, is a well-developed field of medicine, and cancer, unfortunately, is a very common condition, in oncology, we have a good understanding of prognosis. So we can tell based on stage of the disease, patient's features, how many months or years this person has, or if there are other options, experimental therapies, something else. So oncology is the biggest part of MAID. And for these patients, I would say the decision is actually easier, because you can talk about something that's been debated quite a lot, which is foreseeable death. So in the past, you had to have a foreseeable death. And with oncology, we can actually say, okay, you have this chance to live 6 months. You have this chance to live 1 year. You have no chance whatsoever to live 1 year and a half. So there it's in a way easier. This is condition, group one. Group two are neurological conditions, which is your question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, not right now. Thank you.
You don't want to service today?
Give me like half an hour to 1 hour, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Say that to your mom. Okay, so condition two are neurological diseases.
Actually, that was the
and
maid.
in
That was my
this,
maid. I'm at a hotel. That was a maid.
Oh yeah, you're right,
Not my mom.
right. I thought
Different
it was
kind of
mine.
maid, but anyways, keep going.
Okay, so second group are neurological conditions, and in this group, I often found a complex situation, particularly when it comes to chronic disease, like you were asking, Parkinson's, for instance. ALS is an extreme. Either way, it's an easy condition, because there is no cure, death is foreseeable. But there are many other conditions like Parkinson's, where you're dealing with individual variability, a chronic disease. It's really difficult sometimes to really have an idea of the projection of whatever patient you have in front of you future. And then the third condition, which is happening more and more lately, especially with the change of the law, are people that are 93, 94. They have done what they wanted to do in their life. They're just tired of living. They are maybe having some arthritis. They can't do stairs anymore. They use a walker. They're afraid of falling. They don't enjoy life anymore. And in the past, these people would not be eligible for MAID, because they didn't have a disease or a foreseeable death. But now the boundaries are becoming blurrier, and to some extent these people can receive MAID too. And these two groups that I mentioned, chronic neurological disease and people tired of living, are the most difficult ones to assess. And that's the job of the assessor. And if you want, I can tell you more about it.
Yeah, I do. But first, can you give us any sense about what the numbers are like? Do we know like how quickly it's growing? How many people are enrolled in these programs? I guess in particular in terms of neurological
Yeah.
diseases as well.
Yeah, and I don't know the numbers right now. I could actually looked at it. I didn't think about it because we have at least at UHN we keep track of it. I know for sure that most of the patients are oncological patients. There are neurological patients, and most of them are ALS, but there are also atypical Parkinsonism, like PSP, MSA, and there are also some Parkinson's disease. Numbers are growing. But during the pandemic, there's been a stop to the growth. And actually, many people didn't go for MAID during the pandemic. And this is mainly because most of the time, MAID is performed in hospital. And during COVID, it wasn't that easy to have access to the hospital. Number of requests went down. Actually, I don't really understand why there was such a decline of requests. I think the logistics is just part of it. You might also think that in time of global crisis, some of these people tired of living are not so tired anymore because they see that there's a common problem. And actually, I've seen patients with depression doing much better during the pandemic because they realized that they weren't alone anymore in the suffering. So I think there are many reasons there, but certainly the numbers before the pandemic were really going up in an exponential way. Also because more and more MAID is performed also in the community. Obviously, I'm aware of what we do at UHN, but there are other places where MAID can be done. And the sense we have is that in the community, actually, we can people can receive MAID much more easily than at UHN. UHN, we try to really fulfill all the criteria to check all the boxes, but in the community, we have the sense that this is not necessarily the case. Obviously, I'm not sure about it, but I've seen patients refused by us, then went in the community and then got MAID done over there.
Okay. Now, another big thing that you always tell me is that doctors are humans too. Doctors are people. So I'm wondering, I guess, what's it like, especially since you're a neurologist, and neurologists often see patients for a very long period of time. They develop relationships with their patients to some degree. What's it like to be there throughout that period of time and then to see somebody through that last step as just a human being, I guess?
It's another important question. Actually, at some point, I was writing something about it. Let's say you are, as a doctor, you know this person with Parkinson's for many years, and this person at some point says, "Doctor, I wanna consider MAID." My job at this point is simply to tell the patient, "Look, this is MAID. If you want to go for it, I can refer you to the MAID program." And obviously, I won't be the assessor in this particular case because I know the person. But I can tell you that from a personal level, and I don't know here how much is my background, as I mentioned before, but at the personal level, you start wondering, what did I do wrong? What could I have done to avoid this? And in a couple of examples, we ended up in a very strange situation where basically I was the one saying, "Okay, let's go for it." I always try to because I know I'm biased to some extent. I always try not to put a break to the request. I always say, let's move on. But meantime, let's see if we do this, if you do better. Let's see if we change therapy, and so that you can change mind meanwhile. So this introduces a little bit of a, I don't want to call it conflict of interest, but certainly an uncomfortable situation where I'm trying my best, maybe in a rushed way, to do all I can to see whether this person that is considering MAID can do better. This is not good. I'm telling you already, this is wrong. What I'm doing is wrong. but I'm human, like you said, and I know, for instance, of a patient that only once mentioned that to me. It was the first time, and I knew this patient very well, and it was a very sweet woman living alone, and it was a very quick conversation. And I said, "Oh yeah, sure, made this, and that. We can talk about it another time." Clearly, she didn't like the way I approached it because that was the last time I saw her, and then a few months later, I saw on the news that. She had received MAID somewhere else, and she had released an interview where she said that her doctor didn't want her to go for MAID. And obviously, this is not where I was coming from. I wasn't good at capturing that wasn't just a curiosity; it was a real request.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the problem of being human. You can make mistakes.
Yeah. Okay. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. It looks like you're in a beautiful place, and this is also kind of a depressing conversation. I want you to be enjoying yourself. You're supposed to be on vacation.
No, actually,
as well,
this is not. Yeah, that's another problem. No, but that's not a depressive conversation. That is part of life, and like I said, it's a sign of a progressive mindset to have rules and laws around the end of life. So it's normal, and actually talking about it gives sense to your normal life, your normal days, because everybody's gonna die, right? So at least we can enjoy life as much as we can for a long weekend.
Okay. Well, then on that note, something else I guess I wanted to talk about is a man that you said that you've been studying for a long time, or you had to study for a long time, Dante, and his book, The Divine Comedy, and especially that first part, the Inferno, where he met Virgil on the way, and Virgil led him all the way through all the different layers of hell to find Beatrice, was it? I think her name was Beatrice, yeah?
Yeah, but she wasn't in Inferno, she was in a paradise.
Yeah. I guess I'm asking, what was your journey like to get to where you are, to get to this point where you're involved in MAID, and in some ways you're kind of doing what Virgil did. You're shepherding people through those final stages, through the most difficult parts of their lives, to try to get them to where they can find Beatrice for themselves, I guess, or like, if you excuse the metaphor.
Well, yeah, it's a little. Ironically, they say that the place where Dante entered the Inferno is not far from where I am right now.
Oh, wow.
It's like an hour by car. I mean, this is at least the tradition. But Virgil had a different type of role. He was mainly, he was a sort of a guide, a philosophical guide. There is another person that was actually the one carrying people from life to death in a river. And I don't know the English word, but the name of this guy was Caronte. He was on this boat.
Same word in
and
English.
would bring people from.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh yeah. Okay, good. So, anyways, going back to your point, obviously it's a little bit of an extreme analogy, but what can I say? As a doctor, I see many things, and part of my role is to guide people that happen to see through their disease, but also through their life. And I should say that also helps me at the human level to better navigate my own life, which is not perfect, like nobody's, but like anybody's. But I guess the most difficult part of this type of interaction with people is understanding the different values and the different background of the people I see. And sometimes it's also difficult to really grasp what the patient wants and what the family wants, because sometimes it's not necessarily the same thing. And obviously the patient has the rule to decide. And that's not easy, especially in a country like Canada where there are many different cultures. It's a learning curve, and day by day I understand different things about the different cultures, the people I see. Deep down, everyone wants the same. So we're all humans. We all have the same needs, but there are maybe different ways of processing things or requesting help, and so in guiding patients in this case, you also need to take that into account, plus your own bias, as I mentioned before. So it's a growth, and you basically grow up with your own patient, and I guess at the end of the day, this is what experience is all about. And we will see. Maybe in a few years, we'll talk about it again, and I'll tell you what I've learned in the meantime.
Yeah, I'd like to do that. Two last questions, if I may. One,
yeah.
In dealing with the families in the aftermath of MAID, what is that like? I mean, I'm assuming that for the most part, the families are well aware of what's going on, but I'm imagining that there are scenarios where either some family members are taken by surprise at what happens, or they disagree strongly. And I'm guessing there aren't. I mean, it's a pretty simple. Nothing ever goes wrong with MAID. I mean, it's pretty easy at that point to take a life. So there aren't complications really that you have to deal with. But I don't know. What
How about the family, basically? Yeah. So, like I said already, usually it's the patient that decides. Okay. If the patient is not capable of deciding, then the patient can request MAID. So that's actually part of our assessment. And actually, this is a problem sometimes because some patients don't want MAID, but they're afraid of losing the ability to want MAID at some point. So they kind of rush the decision because they want to be to some extent in control, and being in control can be pathological to some extent. Okay, can be pathological to some extent, but it's again one of our rights to decide when to put an end to our own life. So, as I said already, some people want to go ahead even when they don't really want MAID. And then once we tell them about the process, they realize that it's not that difficult, and they drop it. So actually, I would say a big part of MAID is teaching the patient and the family about it. And there's a lot of misconception out there. For instance, I remember once a patient wanted to be followed in the MAID clinic. She wanted to be sure that she had always a spot available for her for when the need would arise. So obviously, this is not the way it works. And once you tell them about it, actually, they're quite happy. They don't go for MAID, but they have acquired the information they wanted to know. Another important part of this process is teaching them about palliative medicine. Once again, it's way more important than MAID. And unfortunately, many people have a wrong idea about what palliative medicine really is. They think it's when you give up. No, that's actually MAID is giving up to some extent. So it's a lot of teaching, a lot of sharing information. And when it comes to the family, what we need to know is also trying to understand what's the overall vibe with the family, if they agree with the patient or not. And I would say most of the time, the family doesn't agree with the patient, but they respect the patient's decision. They're sad about the process. They're sad about this final decision that this person has made, but they are supportive because I guess that's the best thing they can do at this point. So very rarely we end up in situations where you can foresee issues. In this case, we think twice before going ahead. We have more meetings also amongst ourselves.
Okay, well, we talked about a lot of things. There were a couple points where you said that you could have gone into more detail. Is there anything in particular that you think people need to know? Is there any other questions that come up a lot? Is there anything that I missed that's like very burning or that we need to be discussing for anybody that might be interested?
Well, maybe of interest to people could be the bare core minimum that need to be fulfilled to be eligible for MAID. People need to be older than 18. They need to have whole hip in case of Canada. They need to have a disease that is not curable, that is causing disability, and sometimes disability can also be a problem with dignity. It doesn't have to be necessarily a physical disability. There's a very blurry, again, border here, a boundary with with mental problems, with depression in particular. But I would say a person with depression should not be with uncontrolled depression should not be a candidate for MAID, because that would be basically suicide. And obviously, this is why we rely on psychiatrists on board. And then the other thing to look at is whether patients are forced to go for it by someone else in the family, for instance. If there are financial reasons to go for MAID. So those are the different boxes that we need to make sure are have a check mark on it, and so that we can say, okay, this patient is eligible for MAID. And when this happens, usually the patient doesn't go straight for MAID. Usually there's a time that is given to the patient so the patient can think more about it. In some circumstances, the process can be speeded up, and so this time is forgone. But most of the time, people have to wait at least 10 days between approval and execution of the intervention. Another thing we do is teaching them about the intervention. We want to know, do you know how it's going to happen, what they're going to do? And I would say most patients know about the injection, so that part is easy in a way. But it's also part of what we do during the assessment.
Okay. Well, yeah, thank you. And yeah, like you said, I think it'll be interesting to revisit this conversation maybe in a couple of years.
Yeah.
And
for sure, the law will be different back then.
Yeah, enjoy your vacation. Enjoy your time off. Try to make the most of it. Enjoy the beautiful sunset you have behind you and the beautiful location. And yeah, we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Ben.